Hi, I'm Pat Kiernan. This is Pat's Papers. Thanks for joining us this morning. We go through the newspaper headlines from across the country and thin them out to point you in the direction of what we find is most interesting and most relevant. Here's some of what we found today. It may be the most exclusive email whitelist ever created. The Washington Post runs through some of the names who are likely to be on the approved senders list for the president's new Blackberry. After all the discussion about whether Barack Obama could hold on to his coveted wireless email connection, the compromise is a special secure Blackberry that will only send and receive to a pre-approved group of friends and advisors. The headline in the LA Times says it was only after negotiating the Blackberry Accord of 2009 that this arrangement fell into place. The approved senders will all have to be briefed on email policy by White House lawyers. On to the more serious business conducted by the president yesterday. The Washington Post says it is a sudden end to some of the Bush policies on terrorism suspects. With an executive order, the Post says the new president effectively put an end to the war on terror as defined by his predecessor. The order ends aggressive interrogation methods and will close the Guantanamo Bay terror prison within a year. The Kansas City Star with a related story, wondering if the Fort Leavenworth military prison in Kansas will become the new home for terror suspects. The story says the detention center is one of the places on a list of imperfect choices for holding men whose legal status is as murky as their backgrounds. Here's the opening line of another front-page story from the Washington Post. It says, a joke made its way around the Capitol yesterday. How do you know the 2008 election is really over? Because John McCain's causing trouble for Republicans again. McCain expressed a disappointment in fellow Republicans who stood in the way of Hillary Clinton's appointment. McCain told his colleagues that Americans sent a message that they want politicians to work together. Appearing in the Buffalo News this morning and in papers across New York State, the choice of Congresswoman Kirsten Gillibrand to be the junior senator from New York. Governor David Paterson got to make the call because Hillary Clinton gave up the job to become Secretary of State. It was a political mess in New York over the past couple of days, with Caroline Kennedy dropping her bid for the appointment, possibly because of emerging issues over the employment of a nanny. The New York Post is particularly critical of the indecision by the New York governor. Political reporter Jacob Gershman says through all the controversy in Illinois, at least Rod Blagojevich picked somebody and got it over with. A fascinating note about Inauguration Day in the New York Times. The insight coming from a satellite photo which shows the National Mall about 45 minutes before Barack Obama's inauguration. The Times says this overhead shot suggests the crowd wasn't as big as it looked on TV because people were actually clustered around big screen TVs, so they didn't actually fill every square foot as had been assumed when you looked at the shots from a distance. In USA Today, is global warming killing the trees? In older forests in the western U.S., tree deaths have doubled in the past 50 years. Average temperatures are higher, drought becomes a problem. That's how some trees are dying. Others are killed by pests, which thrive in the warmer temperatures. A couple of interesting celebrity photos today, both in the New York Post, which has some fun at the expense of Rod Stewart. The headline is, "Do You Think I'm Tiny?" He looks like a child next to his wife, Penny Lancaster. Some of it's the camera angle, some of it's the fact that she's 6'1". George Clooney was taping an episode of ER yesterday, back in the role that made him famous as Dr. Ross. The episode will run in April as the series winds down its final season. The lead story in the Wall Street Journal is the sudden removal of former Merrill Lynch chief John Thain from his job. It's only been 3 weeks since Bank of America completed its purchase of Merrill, but since that deal was struck in September, the losses have been much bigger than expected. Bank of America also angry that Merrill bonus payments were accelerated so they could put about $4 billion in the hands of employees before the end of the year. One of my favorite stories today is this one below the fold on the front page of the Journal. It is actually about baby boomers who are becoming grandparents but don't want to admit it. In truth, they don't mind the fact that they have grandchildren. They just aren't quite ready to be called grandfather or bubby. The headline suggests Papa Doc and Glamma as alternatives. Tonight in St. Paul, Minnesota, King Boreas is back. The Legend of the King is part of the annual tradition at the St. Paul Winter Carnival. The king will be overthrown by the end of the 10-day festival, signaling that spring and warmer weather are on the way. Ice sculpture competitors are racing the clock. They have 48 hours to complete their work before judging on Saturday morning. Finally, the Academy Award nominations. Benjamin Button and Slumdog Millionaire were the favorites. In the New York Times, coverage of the nomination announcement says, The Reader is the movie that pulled off the biggest coup by sneaking in for a Best Picture nomination ahead of some other movies that had been in contention. The LA Times looks at the business side of the Oscar contenders. The paper notes that the curious case of Benjamin Button, even with 13 Academy Award nominations, will likely end up curiously
in the red.
And that's a look at just some of what's in the newspapers this morning. We try to pick the highlights for you each day, but if you think there's a particular story we should have included, send us a comment. You can do that at patspapers.com, and there you will find links to the individual newspaper websites where you can read these stories in their entirety.